6-year-old girl is found viciously raped and murdered. No witnesses, no murder weapon. It's up to forensic science to catch her killer. But the science points to someone no one suspected.
It was 7 weeks ago yesterday that Andrea Atkinson disappeared from her home.
When the forensics evidence started to turn his way, it surprised us a little bit.
The experts say their technology doesn't lie.
Would you expect to see this profile again? No, you would not.
One man's innocence or guilt hangs in the balance.
It's a case that had too much reliance on science that certainly in some aspects we know today is just flawed.
This is the story of the tragic death of a little girl and the story of forensics on trial. Morning on a holiday weekend. A 6-year-old girl named Andrea Atkinson goes missing. Andrea's single mom calls police. She describes her daughter as blonde, outgoing, wearing a pink coat and blue stockings. An apartment key is tied to a whistle around her neck. The police try to calm her, saying Andrea will probably turn up at a friend's. By the end of the day, there's still no sign of Andrea. Police launch a massive search. Rick Gauthier was a homicide detective in 1990.
Andrea was not a kind of child that ventured away from the building, so the fact that she went missing, suddenly disappeared, that was very unusual, and that made us start to think that there may be foul play involved.
News of the missing child spreads like wildfire.
More than 33 hours ago, 6-year-old Andrea Marie Atkinson told...
As day turns to night, police classify Andrea's disappearance a homicide.
Andrea never made it back to the...
After interviewing neighbors, Gauthier gets his first lead.
The first significant piece of information that surfaced in this case that made us suspicious or concerned about foul play was a sighting given by a resident nearby who said that in the early morning hours of Sunday they had seen a young blonde-haired girl who they thought was Andrea being forced into a blue van and driven away.
For the past 5 days, the search has been focused on wilderness areas such as...
The eyewitness is mistaken. Police have lost precious time chasing down a false lead.
Police have already searched the immediate area twice today and tomorrow plan to expand their search to...
Gauthier calls in the forensic team, highly specialized CSIs who search for microscopic clues. Detective Rick Bunting was the CSI assigned to search Andrea's bedroom for forensic evidence. His grim job is to find fingerprints to identify Andrea in case she is found dead.
When you're trying to find a missing young girl, with adults, sometimes they have fingerprints on file with their company they work with, military service, something like that. With young children, they don't have a lot. They're young into the world. So you would try and find something at their apartment, and that would help you identify them if and when the need became apparent that you had to.
Police still have no indication as to what may have happened to Andrea Atkinson, and after each day goes by, police say fears of foul play are growing.
Days stretch into a week. It's as if Andrea disappeared into thin air. The entire city swings between hope of finding her alive and fear of finding her dead.
A missing child is a big concern to the city. It's more than just a regular missing person, particularly if there's a fear of a sexual assault or a homicide. It increases the intensity of the matter.
Nothing is spared in the search. Little do police know that Andrea never wandered far from home. Meanwhile, Andrea's mom continues to hold hope that her daughter will be found alive.
It makes me feel so good because I know she's like a little miracle. And I mean, everybody loves her. And it reinforces us to keep hanging in there and be positive. This is her daycare doll.
9 days after she went missing, Andrea Atkinson's lifeless body is found in the boiler room on the 6th floor of her apartment building.
Well, right now we're on the 6th floor at 33 Coatsworth, which is the maintenance area. The room behind us is the actual mechanical room where there are hot water tanks and heaters. Andrea was lying on her right side and her body was partially tucked underneath one of the hot water tanks. Approximately about a foot's gap between the floor and the bottom of the tank. She was wedged underneath that. And what I could see was it was the body of a blonde girl, young girl. Next to Andrea was a series of cards that she used to play with, and there were the New Kids on the Block, I think, were the name of the group. Those cards were scattered about the floor in front of her.
Gauthier summons the Forensic Identification Unit. The CSIs are experts at uncovering microscopic evidence that might help him solve the mystery. Who killed Andrea Atkinson?
Yeah, there's a boiler room there. You'll see it. It's already marked off.
We're looking for body fluids. Could be semen, could be blood, could be saliva. We're looking for hairs. We're looking for fibers. We're looking for fingerprints on the floor, different areas, and it's a very systematic approach. You start at one end and you just work your way through. You don't jump all over in something like this.
In a murder with no suspects and no witnesses, forensic evidence will be their only hope of catching the killer. Tony Tesserolo is a forensic scientist who specializes in trace evidence.
The transfer of hairs and fibers between locations or between individuals all stems back to what was said by Dr. Edmond Locard, a French scientist, who said that the microscopic debris that covers our bodies are the mute witnesses, sure and faithful, of all our actions and all our encounters. What he meant by that was that whenever two objects come into contact, there's always a transfer of material between them.
A vicious killer is on the loose, and Gauthier is determined to catch him.
You do that by staying focused, not allowing your emotion to get in the way, and concentrating on the matter at hand. Some of us call it keep your game face on, and that's what it is. You stay focused on what your job is, and your job is to find out what happened.
The boiler room is soundproof. Gauthier believes that the killer knew it was a location where no one would hear a little girl's cries for help. Then the CSIs find a critical clue.
Hey, you want to bag this, please? I think it's a child's bracelet. That's exactly what it looks like.
And as we stood back and looked, we saw that there was a small bracelet on the floor just to the right of where I'm standing.
That area is swept in.
And when you got down to the floor level and looked a little closer, you could see that there was in fact a reddish color smear that had been dried upon the floor.
If it's blood, this could be their best hope at finding out who killed Andrea Atkinson. At midnight, forensic detective Dick Bunting removes Andrea Atkinson's body from the boiler room. He and his partner wear full protective clothing. Bunting says it's critical to avoid contamination of the crime scene.
We have to be able to collect the evidence so that we can say exactly where it came from. Also, we have to be well aware that we don't contaminate that evidence, add anything to it, take anything away, or collect it in such a way that we may degrade it. You have to think of her as a crime scene. You have to be able to use her to have her tell you what happened in her own way.
This is when CSIs sometimes make mistakes. Leo Adler is a defense attorney who has pitted himself against forensic experts for 3 decades.
I find that scientists, some scientists, sometimes subconsciously come to accept what the police tell them. And like a lot of people, they come to resent when someone questions them and perhaps finds fault with what they do.
For Adler, the forensics surrounding Andrea Atkinson's murder soon become an obsession.
Late last night, the body of a small girl was carried on a stretcher from the apartment complex.
The news of Andrea's murder shocks the community, leaving a city paralyzed with fear. A killer is still on the loose.
Police say forensic identification confirms the remains.
I wouldn't let my daughter out. Paranoid. I feel paranoid.
Andrea's mother cannot face the reality that her only daughter is gone. Homicide detective Rick Gauthier admits police made a mistake in not finding her body sooner.
The officers that were in charge of the search did not have in their possession a copy of the blueprints for the building, and in hindsight that turned out to be a significant error. What they did not realize is that on the 6th level, although it's not a full floor, there's an elevator room and a maintenance room, and that ultimately is where Andrea was found.
For the CSIs, losing 9 days is a major setback.
If we had found Andrea Atkinson within a day or two of her being murdered, the evidence would have been probably a lot greater, the physical evidence, because the condition of the body lent to a lot of degradation of evidence. And we have those questions, you know, if only we could have found her a lot earlier.
Gauthier zeroes in on a handful of maintenance workers who have keys to the locked 6th floor. He takes 3 men to headquarters for questioning. The first has a criminal record, which is of interest to Gauthier.
The first that we dealt with was a gentleman who worked here as a cleaner. He was under suspension at the time that this happened. And we had several callers call into the police to advise that they knew him and that they knew he had a history of sexually assaulting children.
The second knew Andrea well. He used to sleep with her mother.
The second, cleaner or maintenance individual, he also had been involved with Andrea's mother for some time in a personal relationship. So he was well acquainted with Andrea.
The third suspect had access to the boiler room, but has a solid alibi.
That took us to the third one, who actually worked that Sunday in the building, but he went home early because he said he was sick. And he was somebody who had been in trouble with the law, but it was minimal.
All 3 deny killing Andrea. Gauthier decides that the cleaner who had been involved with Andrea's mom is his prime suspect.
Take it, you know, take what you need, get me out of here.
Homicide's resources now focus on building a case against suspect number 1. He takes blood and hair samples from all 3 men. At a time before DNA testing, blood typing and hair matching are the best forensic tools available. Now it's critical for the CSIs to retrieve the killer's hair, blood, or semen from the crime scene. Paul Culver is a Crown attorney in Toronto.
There's very seldom a witness to any murder, and quite often with children, particularly where you're dealing with a stranger abduction, there's no one you can easily link to. So a lot of times that's all you have. And it's not so much any single piece of the forensic science, it's the combination of it. When you bring all the pieces of the puzzles together, you see a picture.
To collect hair and fibers, Bunting uses a mylar sheet, an electrostatic blanket that creates plastic snapshots of the crime scene.
We hit it with a static electricity charge, and what it does is it attracts the dust and fibers and anything that's underneath this piece of mylar. And it can give you fibers on the floor, footprints, markings, anything like that that is on the floor. The dust and fibers, everything adheres to the mylar, so you can look at it later.
The remaining hairs and fibers are retrieved by hand in a painfully slow forensic process. Nothing can be overlooked. That night at the morgue, a scan with a UV light reveals semen stains on Andrea's clothes. Whoever killed her also raped her. Gauthier is determined to hunt the child killer down. The morning after the discovery of Andrea's remains, the autopsy begins. The body is so badly decomposed that the coroner cannot determine the cause of death. A dead body often reveals clues about the crime and the killer. Not this time.
Andrea's body had been in the mechanical or the boiler room for approximately 9 days. The room temperature in there was fairly high. The water tanks themselves run a temperature in the 130 or 140 degree Fahrenheit range. So the room itself was very warm. Andrea's body was very decomposed after a 9-day period being exposed to that extreme heat in a confined area like that with no air movement.
The coroner speculates that the killer strangled Andrea with a shoelace that held her key tied around her neck. The next step is to send Andrea's clothes to the Center of Forensic Sciences in Toronto for detailed analysis. In the era before DNA testing, blood typing was the best way to narrow the list of suspects. Keith Kelder is the scientist who examined Andrea's clothes. Using a chemical called Fast Blue, he finds several semen stains.
And they were in the seat area of the panties, dress, and leotards, inside and outside. So several spots, several locations.
The 4 universal blood types are A, B, AB, and O. The killer's semen tells Kelder that he is blood type O. It is an important clue, but not conclusive. 30% of the male population has the same blood type as the killer.
And so here was evidence that was of some help, but that's it. It was able to put it on the scale of inclusion and exclusion.
The question now, are any of Gauthier's suspects type O? Then a twist. There is a new suspect, Andrea's mom's boyfriend.
Ruth had a new boyfriend who had recently just moved in. Now, his name was Doug.
Police say Douglas Heinbach is to be interviewed regarding Andrea's whereabouts.
In cases where children get sexually assaulted or go missing and end up murdered, we always start in the home and work our way out. And a new boyfriend who had a history with the police was of interest to us.
Two weeks after her murder, Andrea's funeral draws so many mourners that loudspeakers are set up outside. Her murder has cast a dark cloud over the entire city, made darker by the knowledge that her killer remains at large.
Andrea, gift of God, your life was much too short. Taken by someone who took what was not theirs to take. We weep with grief and hurt and anger and outrage because we could not protect you.
The pressure is mounting daily on Rick Gauthier to find Andrea Atkinson's murderer. The city is beginning to think the homicide squad is bungling the investigation. For 6 days, the CSIs have been waiting for blood expert Keith Kelder to examine the mysterious stain on the floor.
And so I arrived at the gray stains and I put my UV light on it, and sure enough, they fluoresced, and I tested them to see if they were semen stains.
They are. But will it match the type O semen found on Andrea's clothes?
Jeff, we're off to the races. Perfect.
Meanwhile, another team of scientists analyze the hairs which Bunting CSIs have retrieved from the crime scene. Tony Tesarolo is a leading hair and fiber expert.
There are a significant number of microscopic features that can be used to distinguish hairs between and amongst individuals. And in doing so, the hair and fiber examiner would look at a hair microscopically at a magnification up to about 300 times to examine in detail the root of the hair, the tip of the hair, the individual components of the hair on the shaft, something called the cuticle, the cortex, and the medulla, and look at these microscopic features that are present in variable quantities and degrees within an individual and between and amongst individuals.
Of the hundreds of hairs retrieved from the crime scene, 4 are similar to those from 18-year-old Johnny Tercera.
We found a piece of your hair at the crime scene.
The hair is enough to convince Gauthier it's worth bringing Tercera back in.
I don't know.
John absolutely denied having had any sexual or physical contact with Andrea, and certainly he denied having been involved in her death.
Maybe somebody that goes into the boiler room, the super dragged it, stepped on my hair on the stairs.
But Tercera makes a stunning statement. 2 days after Andrea went missing, Johnny went up to the 6th floor to smoke a joint. He saw Andrea's dead body and ran. He claims he never told the police because he was afraid of getting fired for smoking dope on the job. Gauthier begins to wonder if he's been building a case against the wrong man. Defense attorney Leo Adler says that today he doubts this hair evidence would turn the focus on Tercera.
I don't think that there is a scientist today who would dare literally hang somebody or convict somebody on a hair, given what we now know and given the fact that hair doesn't have any particular characteristic except at the very root where you can get DNA. So that science, I think, has been, if not discredited, certainly diminished by today.
But in 1990, the hairs take Detective Gauthier's homicide investigation in a new direction.
Well, to be candid, I didn't believe his story at all. Things were turning John's way, and certainly I did not accept the fact that with the strong police presence, the community uproar over this missing girl that had been murdered, if he was innocently there and did come up here for a cigarette and saw the body, it would be important information for everybody to know right away, particularly the parents of a missing child.
Gauthier also learns that the 6-year-old knew Johnny. She thought of him as a hero for stopping other kids from picking on her, and she liked to help him with his cleaning tasks around the building. At the Center of Forensic Sciences, tests from the smear outside the boiler room confirm that it's semen and blood. The blood is Andrea's. The semen is type O. It's a match for the samples found on Andrea's clothes. The question is, are any of Gauthier's suspects type O? Kelder sends the crime scene samples over to the new radical DNA department. The lab is about to start a revolution in criminal investigations. In 1990, DNA profiling had barely been tested in the criminal justice system worldwide. The rape and murder of 6-year-old Andrea Atkinson was Toronto's first major case. Pam Newell ran the Center of Forensic Sciences' groundbreaking DNA lab in 1990.
99.9% of all of our DNA is exactly the same. And it's DNA that says build a human being, put a head on the top, 2 eyes, a nose, ears, fingers, toes, liver that functions, heart that functions, etc. We're not interested in that DNA. We're interested in the DNA that is different amongst individuals. We're looking for DNA that's in regions of the DNA molecule that do not code for physical features or for physical functions. It's DNA in a repetitive sequence.
Veteran homicide detective Rick Gauthier was skeptical.
Back in the fall of 1990, DNA was something that we had just barely heard about. We certainly had not had any cases in Toronto involving DNA. And there was even controversy about whether or not it was science back in those days.
Dr. John Way helped conduct the DNA tests on the Andrea Atkinson case.
So in a case like this, you'd be looking for blood, semen, saliva, anything that might contain DNA. Then you extract the DNA from those stains, and that's just a process of breaking open cells, releasing the DNA, purifying the DNA away from everything else that's in a cell, a lot of proteins, etc. And you end up with a pure preparation of DNA. It usually takes a week, 2 weeks to process that DNA and get it to a point where you can actually learn something from it and analyze it using the technology back in 1990.
While Gauthier waits for the DNA results, he continues to gather more forensic evidence. CSI Rick Bunting hopes to make the invisible visible with a forensic technique called superglue fuming.
Now, superglue is a process whereby you add cyanoacrylate, and that's the type of glue. We built a hood with plastic, put some of these glue fuming items that create the fumes inside this hood, and then let it sort of fumes to sort of vaporize throughout this hood. Once the enclosure was removed by ourselves, we then used a type of fingerprint powder.
A few fingerprints are found in the area around the stairs. The process works, but who will the prints match? 4 weeks after Andrea was murdered, the blood lab comes back with results of samples taken from the 4 main suspects.
Comparison samples were submitted from 4 suspects, and these samples were subjected to ABO typing, and it was determined that 1 was an A secretor, 2 were B secretors, and 1 was an O secretor.
A list of 4 is reduced to 1. John Tercera moves to the top of Detective Gauthier's list. The homicide investigator is shocked.
To be candid, the first 2 individuals on the surface were of great interest to us because of their backgrounds. And then along came the 18-year-old who had a minimal police contact, didn't seem to have any, certainly had no history of anything like this. When the forensics evidence started to turn his way, it surprised us a little bit because we hadn't really gotten to John Tercera yet.
Gauthier now focuses all his resources on Tercera. He gets a warrant to search his house, looking for clothing that might link him to the crime scene.
Once we got the early forensic results back, we decided that we were going to attempt to obtain a search warrant for John's house. There'd been a quantity of fiber found on Andrea's body and her clothing that we thought would be of significance to this case.
Johnny Tercera was wearing a pair of blue track pants that Sunday. The police confiscate them and send them to the lab for analysis.
First of all, we do some microscopy to determine the diameter of the fiber, the overall color, and the cross-sectional shape.
Exact colors are distinguished under different light sources. After that, the fibers are tested for biofringence or distinctive molecular structures. Finally, the fiber is heated to determine its melting point.
And at the end of the application of this battery of tests, if we find no significant differences with respect to the results from the question fibers and the known fibers, then we must conclude that they are microscopically similar and could have originated from that same source.
Fibers from John's track pants are microscopically similar to those found all over Andrea's clothes. Defense attorney Leo Adler calls this junk science.
We're not talking about some exotic, handmade, original Chanel creation that was worn by the assailant, containing a type of fabric that only that dress contained. We're talking about ordinary track pants of the sort, very, very common. Again, I think today, no scientist in his right mind would say that and give the types of conclusions that were given at the Teixeira case as to matching and the likelihood of anybody else having the same type of fiber in their pants.
Back in 1990, it's one more strike against Johnny Tercera. Then the final devastating blow. DNA testing confirms the forensic trail.
The result of the analysis was, number one, we were successful in generating profiles from the semen and from the blood in the blood semen stain from the concrete floor. And we were successful in generating profiles from both the blood and from the semen in the semen-stained, blood-soaked leotards from the body of Andrea Atkinson. And that the profile from the semen could not have come from 3 of the suspects and matched the profile from John Carlos Tercera.
Newell calls Gauthier. 7 million to 1. Johnny Tercera killed Andrea Atkinson. In November 1990, a cop, a scientist, and a lawyer decide to put DNA profiling to the test and try to put John Tercera behind bars for murdering a 6-year-old girl.
I remember very clearly meeting with Paul Culver and Rick Gauthier for the first time, bringing Autorad's DNA films with me to show them what a profile looked like and how easy it was to read that there was a match. And I think that they were less than impressed.
The Autorad is a piece of clear plastic, a human barcode. The radical science claims that no two people's genetic codes are alike, and that the DNA found at the crime scene was left by John Tercera.
So this is the profile that was found on the sperm on the leotard of the victim. And this is the profile of sperm blood found on the floor in the boiler room, which matches Mr. Tercera. It doesn't match suspect number 1, which was sampled twice. Doesn't match suspect number 2. Doesn't match suspect number 3.
And then they gave me the same card.
I can't say that I ever got it. My background is definitely not in science, but I knew Pam Newell. I knew that she was a very respected forensic scientist, and she did her best in layman's terms to explain to me.
Detective Gauthier considers his options. Without the DNA profile, he's not sure he's got enough to arrest John Tercera. On the other hand, the homicide detective is nervous about trusting a science he barely understands.
Well, back in 1990, the thought of going to trial with DNA evidence with what we knew at that time, we were concerned. A homicide investigator knows that you only get one opportunity to prosecute these cases, and you have to present the best evidence you have. And typically in these cases, it's hair and fiber and serology. DNA was new, and we did not know what impact, if any, DNA was going to have on our case.
He and his partner consult Crown Attorney Paul Culver, for whom the case has a deep personal meaning.
Andrea Atkinson, who was ironically born on the same day as my daughter, the same day and year. She was exactly the same age. So a lot of the things that we saw in Andrea's life as a 6-year-old at that time, the Barbie dress, the new kids on the block card, the wanting to be out playing with their friends on a Sunday morning, became much more personal.
Culver advises them to make the arrest.
18-year-old John Carlos Tercera, seen here moments after being handcuffed by homicide officers Tom McNamara and Rick Gauthier.
Defense attorney Leo Adler takes Johnny's case. He believes the 18-year-old is innocent.
You get to know your client. You get to know your client very, very well, especially in a case such as this. Johnny has been consistent throughout that it wasn't him. No matter how I cross-examined Johnny, he was consistent in what he was telling me and the fact that he hadn't done it.
In the months leading up to the trial, Pam Newell's lab conducts further DNA tests.
We had a frequency of occurrence of 1.18 million for the semen found on the leotard from Andrea Atkinson, and we had a frequency of occurrence of 1 in 7 million for the semen sample found on the concrete floor.
According to her tests, there is no doubt that John Tercera raped the 6-year-old. Now it's up to her to explain the science to a jury. 2 years pass before the John Tercera murder case goes to trial. By now, scientists are bitterly divided on the accuracy of DNA profiling.
At that time, there was still a controversy raging, particularly in the United States, and there were two groups of scientists that sort of traveled around North America, really testifying, one group testifying for the Crown or the prosecution, and one group testifying for the defense.
For Pam Newell, the case is a chance to prove that DNA profiling works.
This was a very significant case for me personally and for the Center of Forensic Sciences and the DNA unit. This was one of our early cases. This is a case that had a tremendous amount of media coverage and an enormous amount of interest from the general public.
Leo Adler puts the entire forensic team on trial.
I saw problems. The computer dates, for example, were out of whack. The times were out of whack. It wasn't scientific to me, at least in my view. And I felt that for this particular case, that the center was really biting off more than it could chew.
The trial process here was strictly about forensics. It was an attack on the credibility of the police service. It was an attack on the Center of Forensic Sciences. It was an attack on the sciences themselves. And what was not dealt with was what happened with John Tercera that day. He testified he had nothing to do with this, but the trial was all about the forensics.
Adler humbles the forensic scientists one by one. Despite superglue fuming and days of examining one partial print, Detective Bunting could not prove without a doubt that the print was John Tercera's.
The ridges were there, the fingers were there. We spent a couple days trying to enhance, trying to get more out of those fingers, and we just could not get enough to identify them to anybody.
Adler argues that because John Tercera had regular access to the boiler room, it's no wonder the CSIs found hairs similar to his. He even reveals that the blood Tercera voluntarily gave to police took an extra day to reach the lab, trying to create reasonable doubt whether it's his blood at all.
I mean, ultimately, I think, I hope...
Leo Adler is making a compelling case that forensics aren't foolproof.
I think people have to realize that science is not always infallible.
The head of the DNA unit at the Center of Forensic Sciences, Pamela Newell, testified.
Up next is the prosecution's star witness and Gautier's last hope, DNA expert Pamela Newell. For 3 days, defense attorney Leo Adler grills Pam Newell and her DNA evidence. To this day, they are bitter rivals.
Well, Pam was the head and the scientist at that time. She was the DNA department at the CFS. And she very much wanted for DNA to not only be accepted, but for the CFS to become accepted. There was no accreditation system at the time. And she saw this as the case that would make her. In retrospect, I thought that if I cross-examined her at length, that the jury would see the problems with the case.
I think that Mr. Adler's approach was that this was black magic, that we didn't know what we were doing. And his attack was if he couldn't break down the DNA science, that he would break down the DNA scientists.
In the final days of the 4-month trial, John Tercera himself takes the stand. His story never changes. He didn't kill Andrea Atkinson. The forensic scientists have made a mistake.
The forensics are the forensics. They don't change, they don't lie. The facts stay the same. In John's case, he was an 18-year-old that had raped and murdered a 6-year-old girl. It's not something that is easy to admit to.
After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returns their verdict. Johnny Tercera is found guilty for the murder and rape of Andrea Atkinson.
20-year-old John Tercera left the court a convicted child killer this afternoon.
To this day, he declares his innocence.
I can't believe that if Johnny did this, that he wouldn't have faced up to it by now. As I said, I've come to know him, and I've been doing this for almost 29 years, and maybe I've fallen for a story that isn't true, and that and my assessment of him is wrong. But it's a case that had too much reliance on science that certainly in some aspects we know today is just flawed.
Rick Gauthier has worked more child murder cases than any homicide cop in Toronto. He's certain he got the right man.
A successful homicide investigator has to have the ability to detach their personal feelings from the case. And that is so important. It's too easy to get wrapped up in the community problem, the family issues that are surrounding it, and if you don't do that, no one else will.
Leo Adler has appealed Johnny Tercera's murder conviction at the Supreme Court and has been denied. He's still convinced the CSIs were wrong.
I think that there were problems with this case. I think that what I would like to see is not a reanalysis of the extract of DNA, which apparently may still be around, but I would like to take the leotards, which was the key piece of evidence because it's the leotards that the little girl wore, and do a modern-day DNA analysis.
Newell says she has conducted this test.
We went back to the extracted DNA from the samples in this case and used the most current DNA analysis system that's available. The profiles matched. The frequency of occurrence is now, with 13 different loci, is less common than one in the population of the world. So it's less common than 1 in 6 billion. In other words, it's virtual identity. Would you expect to see this profile again? No, you would not. In anyone who has ever been born or ever will be born. I think that's the end of the case.
John Tercera's life sentence brings no comfort to Andrea Atkinson's mother. During the futile search for her daughter, she never gave up hope.
We have a bond, and I can't get through life without her, and she can't get through life without me.
In 1994, her words prove prophetic. She commits suicide on what would have been Andrea's 10th birthday.